This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Climate change matters to a majority of Americans. Just a couple years ago, nearly 6 out of 10 registered voters viewed climate change as an emergency. That's according to a Quinnipiac University poll. So what's being done about it? Here in Connecticut, the governor had committed to a cap on pollution program known as TCI, or the Transportation and Climate Initiative, to reduce emissions by more than a quarter from motor vehicles over 10 years. The money it generated from wholesale fuel suppliers would go towards increasing access to cleaner transportation options. But Connecticut needed legislative approval to implement the regional plan, and that didn't happen this session. Opponents framed the program as, quote, a gas tax, and majority Democrats, the leadership, did not call TCI for a vote. Today, Where We Live, we'll talk to environmental advocates about their next steps, and you can join us, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can share a comment on our Facebook page or find us on Twitter at Where We Live. Joining us on Zoom is Amy McLean. She's Connecticut State Director and Senior Policy Advocate for Acadia Center. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's such an opportunity. I so appreciate it.
And Alex Rodriguez is also here. He's a climate advocate with Save the Sound. Alex, welcome to Where We Live.
Lucy, great to be here on the show with you this morning.
Now, I know there are residents in our state who may have been hearing about TCI, or the Transportation and Climate Initiative, for the first time this past year. But Amy, the work on this regional plan has been going on for some time. So explain to us how it would have worked.
Well, thank you. Yes, it has been going on for some time. In fact, 6 to 8 years regionally, this has been worked on. And in Connecticut, we really ramped up this effort about 2 years ago and working with a huge coalition of folks that has built over time, folks that have never stopped working on this and won't stop, even though we weren't able to get that legislation this session. Transportation Climate Initiative is the first of its kind multi-state bipartisan effort to reduce carbon emissions from gas and diesel-powered cars, diesel-fueled trucks, and other heavy vehicles, and increase investments in equitable, cleaner, and more resilient transportation system. So initially, there were 13 states that were involved, but now then 3 Northeast states and the District of Columbia signed on to the initiative in December, Connecticut being one of them. And frankly, Connecticut had been a leader and is still going to be as soon as we can get past this little hiccup. So what does it do? It accomplishes 5 things. And I agree with you that I think this is a complicated program, but it's also something that is market-based. And it's not something that is going to be a tax or anything like that. So it does these following things. It accomplishes 5 things: greenhouse gas emissions reductions from the transportation sector, improvement in air quality and public health, investments in more modernized transportation choices, including bikeways, pedestrian walkways, electric vehicles, and public transit, mass transit, very important. Job creation and more economic opportunity, and equity, most important as well. Equity for communities hurt by the most air pollution and the underserved and overburdened systems. So we need to have better solutions right now for Connecticut. We don't have any tools because this was not passed as of right now.
When we talk about the emissions and the reductions that are needed, I'm wondering if you can just break it down further. When we think about transportation, how much of the emissions comes from transportation alone in our region?
40% of our carbon emissions are from transportation sector. And this is actually the worst kind because it's particulate matter, and it is the leading cause of asthma in most of our urban cities in Waterbury and Hartford and in New Haven.
I'm glad you brought up the health impacts, Amy, because I know in this conversation that lawmakers have been having and a lot of the coverage, I don't feel like that's really been a focus. And so I'm wondering, Alex, if you could chime in when we think about all the benefits that Amy has laid out to TCI, when we think about the people that are impacted with this transportation emissions in our region. Alex, can you hear me? Oh, it looks like Alex is muted. Alex, can you unmute?
Yes. Sorry about that. My connection went unstable for a moment. You were speaking about the health impacts. Yes, Lucy?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. This past session, I had been working with my team to recruit sign-ons from medical and healthcare professionals in support of the Transportation and Climate Initiative. There was at least 50 sign-ons from doctors, from nurses, CNAs, LPNs that support the Transportation and Climate Initiative because many many people working in healthcare do astounding work to treat the illnesses that patients are suffering. However, they have also expressed a willingness to play a role in reducing the health hazards impacting people in our most environmentally distressed communities. If you take the last year, COVID-19 and the disproportionate effects of it in our urban areas is astounding. It is no secret that those suffering from pre-existing conditions are more vulnerable to COVID-19 and other respiratory-related fatalities.
So when we talk about the way this program would have worked, again, wholesale fuel suppliers paying for the pollution that these extra emissions create, but then that money generated, Amy, would then be reinvested not only in cleaner transportation options, but also looking at these communities that are experiencing high rates of pollution.
Yes, that's correct. So the original TCI had a set aside of 35% of the resources proceeds that were generated from this investment. That 50% is what Connecticut decided to put forward. So 50% of the revenue raised would go to the most impacted by the transportation issues, transportation emissions. So let me just give you an example. So in 2023, or just thereafter, when this went into effect, if we had passed it this session, there would be about $89 million. And I know that this has been a talking point for Governor Lamont, who is supportive, by the way, of this program, and also his administration. Never wavered on it. We did need a little bit more of an elbow, but other than that, we appreciate very much his support. So if you have $89 million coming in, and half of that is going toward the most impacted communities, that would be $45 million. And that would go to things like, better public transit. Right now, our bus situation is not great. We would electrify all of our buses. That would be both public and the school buses, which spew diesel all over the place in areas, and it's without, no abatement on that. So it would go toward air monitoring systems in most of the areas that are most impacted by the highways, which they all sort of meet in Hartford. Let's use Hartford as an example. Think about the highway system that just sort of surrounds the whole city. Those are all that emissions is just flowing in. And that is what the problem is, because we're being inundated by these emissions in places like that.
Alex, in your role as a climate advocate for Save the Sound, I understand you were helping advise the state in these environmental justice programs and how this money would be invested. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about what happened this session, that the lawmakers would not call this for a vote.
Yes. So at the beginning of the legislative session, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, under the leadership of Commissioner Dykes, convened weekly meetings with environmental justice advocates, myself included, because we recognized that there were communities that weren't so aware of this program, and so we wanted to make sure that we could come back to our communities and give them a just description of what was really happening here, and what we would report back to our communities after meeting with Commissioner Dykes would be this. This program is meant to cap pollution on the biggest polluters and require that they pay for clean transportation technologies to avert health-related illnesses, in respiratory-related illnesses in our communities. I feel honored to have been a part of that. The conversations are going to continue. I was asked to be a part of these weekly meetings because I had previously played a role in supporting Middletown procuring Connecticut's first electric school bus. This was a 3-year-long campaign that came to fruition this past February, where it was unveiled by DATCO in Middletown.
Amy, I'll ask you. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, I'm sorry. And so TCI is a vehicle to support more clean transportation infrastructure, such as that bus, and such as the 2, maybe 3 transit buses, electric transit buses that were unveiled by Greater Bridgeport Transit Authority in the city of Bridgeport this past year. There's great stuff going on for clean transportation in Connecticut, but TCI provides us the funding to get there.
And so then, Alex, why did this not get called up for a vote, in your understanding?
In my understanding, this was not called for a vote because Senate and House leadership outwardly told the public, in not so many words, that they didn't have the votes, which is a gross fallacy. They certainly did have the votes to make this happen. We were talking to every senator.
Looks like Alex's connection dropped. So Amy, I'll ask you the same question. Your understanding, working with the Acadia Center, talking with lawmakers and other environmental groups, why this did not get called for a vote if there are so many benefits for not only our region, but for residents in our state?
Yeah, I think I'm blown away by the decisions that were made this session on climate bills, not just this one, but we really missed an opportunity here. And we do know that, and we feel strongly that the failure to pass this important, incredibly, best stuff in a decade legislation on climate, it squarely falls on the shoulders of the Senate leadership. And we are sad to say that the true losers then are the Connecticut residents, including those who are going to continue to breathe some of the most polluted air in the nation. We have 2 or 3 of the worst environmental for air pollution towns, cities in this state. And the obligation of people in power to address this and to give us an opportunity to change that, it was there. And we did, and Alex is correct, we did do a lot of talking to all senators. A lot of the senators focused on the Senate because it was a Senate bill. They decided to put it into the budget. And that was a decision that was made for many reasons. And this is all, internal decision making. The bill itself was a standalone bill. It was called SB 884. And it went into the budget. And when it got into the budget, it was then used as a tool to get other things. This is often what happens in politics, but with this one, it seems it's unconscionable. And we are extraordinarily disappointed with the folks that did not make the right decision as far as we were concerned. They also decided to listen to the opposition. And let me tell you a little bit about the opposition. They're industrial lobbyists, and they are behind a well-financed opposition to modernizing our transportation system. These companies, make no mistake, they make money when we spend more time in driving less efficient fuel cars and trucks. When we sit in traffic, they profit. When electric vehicles and bike paths and safe streets are stymied, they win. Our loss is their gain. We need to do better than that and make the polluters pay.
When we talk about leadership that did not call this for a vote and the internal decisions, when we talk about the opponents, Amy, to TCI, where they called TCI a gas tax, this idea that fuel suppliers would pass on their costs to people buying gasoline. My understanding is that the cost would maybe be 5 cents and could be up to 9 cents that maybe residents would be paying if TCI was implemented. Can you talk about that and why the opponents were able to sway lawmakers by using this rhetoric?
Well, that's a lot. That's a big question. And I have lots of answers, but I'll just address the first part. So it's not a tax on gasoline. Mm-hmm. It's a fee on corporate polluters. TCI involves a fee for gasoline and diesel fuel suppliers holding allowances. There is no requirement that suppliers pass this fee on to the public. And even if they do, what you just said is 5 cents, possibly more, but that's a few pennies on a gallon, right? But I think the second part to my answer is, if you remember, we had a very big backlash and sort of rising up against tolls a couple of years ago, right? So a couple of years ago, there was a constituency that decided they were going to kill tolls, and they did. But they were organized, and this is how it works. They were already organized, and then they were funded through means that we can only guess at. We have some ideas, but they were funded, they were organized, and then they used the same talking points, say no to gas tax. Because that resonates with people. It's a scary idea, and it makes people think, I already pay too much in one way or another in this state. I don't want another one. But we have to understand that's a gross misrepresentation of what TCI is.
You're hearing Amy McLean here on Where We Live as we talk about the Transportation and Climate Initiative. This is a regional plan to put a cap on pollution, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our region. In Connecticut, the legislature needed to approve this before the state could really start to implement this plan. That didn't even get called for a vote this session. Alex Rodriguez is back, but he's on the phone with us now. He's a climate advocate with Save the Sound. Let me ask you, Alex, when we talk about what happened in this regular session and then now the special session, I believe, again, there was another special session just to deal with talking about a different issue, which is legalizing cannabis. But it seemed like TCI got caught up in the Democrats' fight with the governor over raising taxes on the wealthy. I want to quote from a Connecticut Mirror article where Senator Looney, who's the Senate president, said that if Lamont insisted tax hikes on the rich would hurt the economy, tax hikes of any kind should be off the table. Looney was quoted as saying, if we're not talking revenues, then we're not talking revenues. And so the idea that, maybe 5 cents or more would go to consumers and could hurt, especially low income residents. If the governor was really committed to this, Alex, should he have bent a little on some of the Democrats' proposals to raise taxes on higher income individuals?
So that's a great question. I think in my official capacity as a climate advocate with Save the Sound, I can't really remark too much on what we believe on fair taxation. I think that the governor, I think that the House and Senate leadership, I think they should have all gotten this over the finish line. It's absolutely ridiculous that we did not get this passed in the regular session nor the special session. We need climate accountability because we need to support Connecticut by preparing to avert future climate disasters, and we can only do that through the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. To put it short, I do fault Lamont personally for this as well. However, I do put more blame on Senator Looney for strong-arming the conversation. He knows that TCI is not a gas tax. He knows it. However, he bought into the opposition's talking point to really strong on the conversation.
You're hearing Alex Rodriguez, again, a climate advocate with Save the Sound. Amy McLean is here, Connecticut State Director and Senior Policy Advocate for Acadia Center. We're going to continue talking after the break. So what happens now with the Transportation and Climate Initiative? Even if the state legislature didn't vote on the state formally working to implement a plan, the program doesn't go away. We're going to talk about next steps, and we're going to hear from a student committed to environmental justice in our state to talk about Connecticut's efforts. You can join us too. 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can share a comment on our Facebook page or find us on Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We're talking about whether state lawmakers are serious about climate change and ways to reduce Connecticut's greenhouse gas emissions and invest in a cleaner transportation system. The program with that goal is known as TCI, or the Transportation and Climate Initiative. Last December, Governor Lamont signed an initial agreement to join along with Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and D.C. But Connecticut can't formally implement the regional program without legislative approval, and lawmakers did not call TCI for a vote this session. We're talking about this with environmental advocates today on Zoom. Amy McLean, Connecticut State Director and Senior Policy Advocate for Acadia Center. On the phone, Alex Rodriguez, Climate Advocate with Save the Sound. Amy, I wanted to ask you, this is being framed in the media and other places that because the vote didn't happen, this regular session and the special session, that TCI is, quote, dead in Connecticut. Is that a fair characterization? What could be some possible next steps?
So it was a power struggle, and the Senate leadership failed us. But the people of Connecticut need this transformative program, and the Senate leadership's job is just not done. They can still do it, but they can do right by us, and we're not going away. So, as Alex alluded to, we are going to be continuing to keep Connecticut as one of the leaders in this effort, give leadership and other state decision makers the opportunity to learn more about what the details are. I think because there were so many barriers to being able to access our legislators this year, I don't know if people know this, but it was a virtual session, quote unquote. And we as people who are trying to get things done and talk to our decision makers were not allowed in the building. And we were limited to just, phone calls into the LOB, which is the Legislative Office building, to staff that weren't there because they don't answer the phone. So we had to rely on messages that you weren't sure if they were getting there or not. So then you're reduced to emails to their state government emails. So we did a lot of social media, and we're going to continue to raise awareness for decision makers so they can feel that they have all of the information they need. Speaker Matt Ritter, he said they didn't have enough information. Well, beyond the fact that we've been actually messaging this now for 6 months very heavily, but 2 years above that, it's kind of like it wasn't being thought about. It's not that there wasn't enough information. No one actually had the ability to look at it because they were getting mixed messages from the Senate. So I talked to a House leader or a House representative yesterday who said, we were being given the information that the votes weren't there in the Senate. And that was what Alex said earlier. That wasn't true. So that gives us as advocates the advantage because we have a running list of state lawmakers who have said yes to this. And what we're going to do is continue to meet with them both individually, possibly by Zoom, webinars, possibly in person, and continue this information, dissemination, understanding, have them be giving us the questions that are tough. If you don't understand it, you don't vote for it. I get that, because nobody wants to feel like they don't know what they're talking about. We are here to give you information. Please reach out to us. We want to reach out to you.
So if they can call it a special session to pass a bill to legalize cannabis, do you think that they can get serious enough to pass this TCI in a special session, Amy, or is that off the table?
I'm an optimist, so I'm going to say they can do that if they really want to.
But you're not hearing that as of now.
I can say no, I have not.
Yeah. Alex, I'll go back to you. I know you work with a lot of young people on climate change issues. You think there's a generational difference in terms of how seriously residents are taking climate change seriously? And when we think about who's in the state capitol, who's in the leadership versus the people you're talking to in communities who are really worried about climate change as an existential threat to our state.
Absolutely. I think there's a noticeable difference in anxiety towards the climate crisis. Many people my age and many Gen Zers, they fear for their future. They feel similarly to that of Greta Thunberg, who famously said, to the UN, "You're taking our future away from us." I can say that some of the younger legislators, such as Senator Haskell, have spoken great in support of TCI, and they put their votes where their mouth is, because they acknowledge that the climate crisis is an existential threat, and TCI was one vehicle towards mitigating that threat. And so, really, I must echo Amy's optimism earlier. We are hoping that the legislature comes back for a special session. I spoke to two state representatives that said, we want to come back to get TCI done. However, it is in the Senate leadership's hands, and if that is the case, so I think the Senate leadership and the House leadership should know that voters will be looking at climate change as a bigger issue in next year's state elections, and they need to put their votes where their mouth is immediately. They need to develop longer climate resiliency and climate action plans to combat the crisis. We won't stand for anything less.
You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter @WhereWeLive. I wanted to get another voice in this conversation, one of the young people that I just referenced. Dave John Cruz Bustamante is a student at Wilbur Cross High School in New Haven, a community organizer with Sunrise New Haven, and an operations apprentice at the Citywide Youth Coalition. Dave, welcome to our show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So you're a young person and you're involved in climate activism. So how do you respond when you see what's happening or not happening at the state capitol and looking at other initiatives to help our environment?
You know what? I'd say the first emotion is anger and some sort of despair. It's very disappointing, but not super surprising to see politicians playing God when it comes to the lives of people, of Black and brown children, of working class families. And this is just one example of that. But at the same time, I think it's important to not fall into despair because it's very, very easy to do that. And, if they keep knocking us down, then I guess we'll just keep getting up. You know what I mean? And, of course, I'm sure there'll be other initiatives and other bills that will come into fruition, and maybe even reviving the TCI that'll help us in doing that and mitigating the climate crisis.
When you think about climate justice in your community, Dave, I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the issues that you're most concerned about.
Of course. I think when a lot of people, especially older folks, think about environmentalism, climate justice, the first thing that comes up in many people's heads is, tree-hugging people who, are first concerned with like the birds and the animals and the environment. And I think that is extremely, extremely important. But I think one distinction with environmentalism and climate justice is that climate justice not only focuses on our climate and our immediate environment, nature, but it also focuses on the social aspects too, because all of these systems overlap with each other. They're all interconnected. And I think one of the bigger issues in my city, especially in my neighborhood, is, public safety is one of them, as well as air pollution. There are a lot of children, disproportionately Black and brown children, who are hospitalized for asthma compared to white children. And I think that's an important fact to bring up because, that kind of shows a more systemic issue at hand. But I think in my immediate community, I think one of the biggest problems is public safety, pollution, and food security at this time especially. There has been a lot of hardship, and there's always been hardship and poverty in New Haven.
Those are some great points that you brought up, Dave. Kevin on Twitter, he sent us a message, a lot more than just TCI wasn't passed. There's a moratorium on fossil fuel plants, emission standards for trucks, including e-bikes in the cheaper program, if I'm saying that correctly. So there's a lot at stake, not just focusing on TCI, Dave.
Exactly, yes. And, the organization that I'm a part of, Sunrise, we talk a lot about a Green New Deal. And I think a lot of people think of the Green New Deal as one piece of paper, one piece of legislation that single-handedly transforms our society. And that's not the case. As we've seen with the New Deal before around, after the Great Depression, it wasn't one single piece of legislation. It was a variety of bills and laws that were passed in Congress federally throughout the decade. And I think that's what we'll be seeing in this upcoming decade too, I think a lot of people, especially younger people, feel the climate anxiety, but I think a lot of them are also energized by it and, really transforming our society. I think a lot of people are waking up to the inequalities, the unnecessary suffering that a lot of community members face. And so, yes, there is still a lot of hope to have still. There's still a multitude of other bills that address the problems that we have in our society. So, of course, like I said, if we keep getting knocked down, we'll just get back up.
That's Dave John Cruz Bustamante, a student at Wilbur-Cross High School in New Haven, a community organizer with Sunrise New Haven. Dave, thank you so much for calling in. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care, y'all.
This is Where We Live. Today we're getting reaction from environmental groups about the legislature's failure to vote on a bill that would have enabled Connecticut to implement a cap and invest program known as TCI, focused on reducing transportation emissions. Alex Rodriguez with Save the Sound. I wanted to go back to you if you could respond to what Dave shared, especially when we think about air pollution. I'm wondering if you could talk more about how, if TCI were implemented, how would the state monitor pollution and see whether it's reduced in these communities hardest hit?
Yes, so as Amy mentioned earlier in the conversation, there would be funding available to support. There would be funding to support air quality monitoring along the most polluted transportation corridors. But something special about TCI is the growing progress that environmental justice advocates made in our conversations with DEEP, and when we were discussing it with the Environment Committee chairs and the Transportation Committee chairs, we procured language in the bill to support 50% of the TCI auction revenue going toward communities most overburdened and underserved by the transportation system. And in addition to that, securing an equity and environmental justice working group made up of representatives from communities overburdened by transportation pollution and underserved by the transportation system. There is a seat for a wide demographic of people who want a better transportation system, who want clean transportation and want to do something about the climate crisis. These are not mutually exclusive topics. The representation, a wide array of representation is greatly needed on that board, so that our state leaders know what is most pressing in terms of infrastructure improvements, because Governor Lamont said it best at the beginning of the session. These decisions should be looked at through the lens of green jobs, environmental justice, and public health. And TCI was a vehicle for all three of those things.
Amy, I wanted to go back to you, Amy McLean, Connecticut State Director and Senior Policy Advocate for Acadia Center. Gary called in, wasn't able to hold, but he wanted to share. He believes this is a tax. TCI is a tax, and thinks that guests are misrepresenting that by saying it's not a tax. And he wants to know how much of pollution comes out of the state and how much of this pollution comes from large trucks versus regular drivers. Can you address that?
Actually, trucks are the bigger of the pollution emitters, along with buses, just purely because they're bigger and they use diesel fuels and so on. But as far as it not being a tax, it I don't know how else to say it. It is not because this is not being mandated to be passed on to the residents. It's no requirement that suppliers pass along this fee to the public. If gas suppliers want to pass it on to the public, they can, but it's not. But it's expected to be minimal. There was a study that was done that was debunked from Tufts University that modeled the increase potentially to be 35 cents, and it was not too long after it was released that the actual author retracted it and said, no, I was using the wrong numbers. Sorry. So what happened then was that word had already gotten out there. That was a way to be able to, frame the issue. I'm not going to tell Gary that, I think it was Gary, that, he can't look at it as a tax, but it just isn't.
One more for you, Amy, before we have to go to break. We know that Connecticut's already part of a regional initiative at curbing carbon emissions called RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And we've seen in our state that some of those funds from that program that were supposed to go towards Connecticut's energy efficient audits, that the legislature raided some of those funds. And so when the public hears that, and then we're hearing about a new program, TCI, and money generated to be reinvested in communities, is it problematic where you can see where the public doesn't have trust that the lawmakers will do what the program intends?
Yeah, I understand their frustration. We were extraordinarily frustrated with the fact that those funds were raided. They also raided actually other funds too that were not supposed to be used for anything but those programs as well. That's a failure, in my opinion, of keeping things as a priority when you are in a decision-making role. There was pressure on the legislature to fill a real hole in their budget. They saw this pot of money and they said, oh, let's take that. And, there was an outcry when that happened. I believe it was 2017. And it was railed against. But just as in this session, in my opinion, they didn't have the strength to stand up to it. They couldn't find the answers that were better answers. And so for the public to mistrust some of the decisions that lawmakers make, that's understandable. I'm not going to say that they shouldn't be wary, but I will say that if you want to live in a state, in a region, in a country where we are going to be healthy and not be sickened by our transportation emissions, then you need to be brave as lawmakers and make the right choices and don't raid pots of money. That this particular resource would go into a special transportation fund that exists and is not allowed to be taken any money out of. So it's different than RGGI. So there's another sort of protection there. So I don't think the likelihood of this being raided is as high as it could be if it wasn't in the special transportation fund.
We'll have to leave it there. It's been an interesting conversation, and of course, we'll return to TCI to see what happens in our state and the region. Thank you, Amy McLean, Connecticut State Director and Senior Policy Advocate for Acadia Center. Also, thanks to Alex Rodriguez, Climate Advocate with Save the Sound. Now, coming up after the break, we'll talk to a Rhode Island reporter about how that state will approach the Transportation and Climate Initiative, known as TCI. You can join us too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Rhode Island is one of the 3 states plus D.C. that signed a memorandum of understanding to work on implementing the Transportation and Climate Initiative in their jurisdictions. As we've learned, Connecticut needs legislative approval, and that didn't happen this session. In Massachusetts, Governor Baker has the authority to become a part of an interstate compact on his own, without legislative approval. So what's happening in Rhode Island? Joining us now on Zoom is Alex Kufner. He's an environment reporter for the Providence Journal. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So what is the reaction in Rhode Island to what happened or didn't happen in Connecticut?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the legislators and the advocates to support the program, there's been a lot of disappointment. They feel that they were counting on Connecticut moving this forward to give some momentum to what was going on in Rhode Island, and I think there were already questions about whether this was going to go forward in this legislative session, and what happened in Connecticut only sort of set things back even more here.
Now, when the MOU was signed by Rhode Island, now you have a new governor. So how does that change the calculus here?
Yeah, I think that delayed things, certainly. I mean, we had, when Gina Raimondo signed the MOU back in December, and then she was tapped as President Biden's Commerce Secretary. So she left in, early March. We had a new governor who had been briefed on the program, but he hadn't come out in support of it. And I've been told, he has come out publicly since then. So in mid-May, he said he supported it. And just last night, I was talking to some environmental officials who said he is fully behind the program. Apparently, he's written an op-ed with Ned Lamont and Charlie Baker, sort of avowing their support for the program. I don't think it's been published yet. So he supports it. But I think it took a while maybe to bring him up to speed. So that delayed things. We were also in our legislative session, we were in the middle of passing, what's considered here landmark climate legislation to enact mandatory emissions reductions. So that took a lot of time and took a lot of attention, I think, away from TCI. And now, it's really late in the session here. So, I don't think, I'm almost certain nothing's going to get done, before they adjourn in June. That being said, the legislation is moving in the Senate. So actually just last night, it cleared the Senate Environment Committee, which means it's going to go to a floor vote in the Senate on Tuesday. And it looks like, they do have the votes to get this passed. But what happens there is going to be meaningless unless things move forward in the House. And, the bill hasn't even gotten a hearing in the House yet.
Let's talk about Charlie Baker and Mass, because again, he can implement this plan without legislative approval. But hasn't he expressed reluctance in the past that if other states don't come along, that puts Mass in a bad position?
Yeah, so the way that the TCI, the MOU is written, I think they need 3 jurisdictions to go forward with it. I think there's that basic part of the MOU right there, but I think also, it seems to me that every state in DC is sort of looking to each other to, no one wants to sort of go out first. I think behind the scenes, again, I've been told that in Mass that they are, moving forward sort of behind the scenes, and they're fully committed to this. But as far as pulling the trigger on it, I haven't seen anything yet.
When we look at RGGI again, this other multi-state agreement to put a cap on emissions, what's different when we think about TCI? Is it because there is this question of consumers having to pay a little bit more at the gas pump?
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, I think, arguably, RGGI, would do that too. I think, I don't know if it's just a psychological thing that we don't feel it as much because, we just get, our electric bill, after the fact, rather than, with gas, we go to the pump and we may see the effect as we're, pumping for gas. I don't know, the reason why, but it does seem like RGGI went through, again, even though RGGI got off to sort of a modest start, there are only a few states that joined at the beginning, and then it's grown since then. But it just didn't sort of feel like there was, as much opposition around it. It seemed to, maybe it seemed a little bit easier. I'm not sure.
A last question for you, Alex. We heard earlier that transportation accounts for nearly 40% of Connecticut's carbon footprint. Is that similar in Rhode Island? And without something like TCI, how will any of these states reach these emission reduction targets?
Right. So it is the same in Rhode Island. And so you need something, whether it's TCI or something else, you need to do something. And, in all these states now, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, we have mandatory emissions reductions targets. So how are you going to get there unless you pass something that addresses transportation? And, there is, this opposition that's out there, but I haven't seen any of them suggest an alternative. So, even if you don't support this as a policy goal, well, it is law now in these states, and something needs to be done. And I'm not sure, what that is if it's not TCI.
And just to remind our listeners, here in Connecticut, in 2018, Governor Malloy signed into law the mandatory emissions reduction target of 45% below 2001 levels by 2030. So it'll be interesting to see how Connecticut handles that, and if it's mandatory, what happens if these states don't meet these goals. I want to thank Alex Kufner again for joining us to give us a taste of what's happening in Rhode Island related to TCI. He's an environment reporter for the Providence Journal. Alex, thank you for your time today.
Thanks a lot.
I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today's show produced by Carmen Baskoff. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. You can listen to Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Tomorrow we'll be off for Juneteenth, and we'll bring you special programming during this time slot. Thanks for listening.